Today we talk about Empire of the Sun, a simulation of the Pacific Theater of Operations in World War II, published by GMT Games. It is a game that has been around for a couple of years. It is a little bit of a classic among those that had the guts of learning it, because it is not for the faint of the heart. This is a game that has a level of complexity which is way above the average of games that you would find even among the offers of publishers such as GMT Games that do not shy away from complex designs. Certainly they did not do that when it came to this game. Strategic simulation of World War II in the Pacific, card-driven game, so an engine that is very popular. Let me tell you a little bit about the game. I will not even venture into describing the rules and the specifics of the rules in any level of detail, because we would both go nuts before I'm done. There's a lot of meat to digest here. I want to give you a sense of the main and general concepts, and then I want to give you my impressions after learning the game and playing the game. Again, not a game that is very easy to learn, but not impossible to learn either. This is the map of the game. Here you see the paper version. My boxed copy also came with a cardboard version, and it is possible to also purchase a mounted version as an optional thing. The map represents clearly the theater operations during the Pacific, the war in the Pacific. At the beginning of the game, if you're playing the campaign scenario, well, you may expect things to be more or less where you would expect them to be. You will have some American units in the Hawaii, a smaller group in this area, Japanese units in Japan, of course, and in this area here and along the coast of China, Dutch units in this area, and some Commonwealth units in this area here. Very important resource hexes such as that one there that have yellow borders are resource hexes. The number of resource hexes that the Japanese player controls determines the number of cards that he will receive. Every 2 hexes, resource hexes controlled, equals 1 card. Now, in turns from 2 to 4, however, the Japanese player receives 7 cards by default. That is because of the previously stored resources that Japan has. After that, you had to rely on your resource hexes. That means that in the first couple of turns in the campaign scenario, or in scenarios that start in 1942 anyways, the Japanese player needs to push towards resource hexes as quickly and as efficiently as possible. The Dutch units that are defending the resource hexes are not particularly strong, the ones that are around there. Commonwealth units, a bit more. Still, there is a lot of them, and the Japanese player really can't waste the time. The Japanese player needs to have a good hold of resource hexes in this area of the Pacific before turn 5 starts, otherwise things get a little tough. Also, the American player does not receive many cards in the first couple of turns, and then later in the game starts receiving 7 cards by default. And that means that the Japanese player may find himself out of resources precisely when the American war machine or the Allied war machine is in full swing, and precisely when the Allied player starts receiving a lot of cards. The card number, the number of cards the players receive can still modify by several factors. There are procedures to determine that. For example, the Japanese player may be hurt in the number of cards he receives by American submarine warfare. There's a procedure to resolve that. Also, there is a track here that indicates the level, the situation of the war in Europe. There's a marker that is moved based on card events mainly, and when it goes down on this track here, indicating the war in Europe is getting tougher and tougher for the Allies, bad things happen for the Allied player. Yes, you're in the Pacific, but you're still suffering the effect of defeats in the European theater of operations, And one of the effects is a reduction in cards. Other bad effects may happen if the war in Europe doesn't go very well. For example, reinforcements are delayed, bad stuff. Also, you have a political will track that will be affected by events during the game. If it reaches 0, then it means that the Americans are ready to negotiate, and it means that, well, that's bad, because that means that the ally player has lost the game. More tracks on the map. There is a track to record the status of India, the political status of India, status of the Burma Road, Japanese divisions available in China, the political situation of the Chinese government that may go from stable to collapsed. A lot of military and political factors that are taken into account here, that are part of the experience. Now let's have a look at the map a little more in detail. As you can see, there is a lot of water. That's kind of important for a game about the Pacific. Also, there are different types of terrain. Yeah, units also do use terrain. And very important symbols are the ones that indicate ports and that indicates airfields. There are a lot of those here in other areas of the map, as you can imagine. Not nearly as many. There are areas where, well, it's a little harder to fly. The players control units represented by many different counters, many different types of units. The units controlled by the Japanese player are all the same, they are all yellow. The ally player controls Marines, American Army units, Commonwealth, more Commonwealth, more Commonwealth, more Commonwealth, Dutch, and Chinese. Of course, there are restrictions when it comes to the types of units that you can activate. Key concepts about the counters, and that means, of course, about the units. Headquarters, crucial to activate units. You need to activate a headquarter to activate units. The headquarter in turn activates units. The number on the bottom left corner of headquarter units is the range up to which you can activate units. There may be limits to the path of activation that you trace, restrictions. Then we have ground units with 2 values on them, attack and defense. And the first 2 numbers of ships and aircraft units also attack and defense, but these units also have a 3rd value, which is range. Actually, not all naval units have range, only the air carriers. So the 3rd number really refers to range of air units, and they may be independent air units or units dependent on carriers. In that case, the air capability is abstracted. You have to imagine the range being projected from and by the aircraft carrier. Also, air units also project an area of influence around them, which is of 2 axes. So 2 axes in any direction are influenced by air units, and that limits certain functions. For example, the opponent cannot perform strategic movement in an area of influence of an opponent. The command path of a headquarter cannot enter the zone of influence. You can annul the zone of influence of an opponent by placing your own zone of influence. So the zone of influences of different units annul each other, and so you can sequence things so that you can first annul the zone of influence of an opponent, and then you can use those hexes. Ground units do not have an explicitly designed naval capability on them, but the players receive shipping points that they can use to move ground units by sea. This is a card-driven game. Each player has an individual deck of cards that will be used during the game to perform actions and to activate units. Each player receives a hand of cards at the beginning of each turn, and the number is influenced by several factors. The card can be used for its operational value, the number printed in the top left corner of the unit, or it can be used for the event. When you are resolving an event, you play the card and you simply resolve the text. You do what the text tells you to do. Some cards can also be used as reactions to what the other player is doing. Some cards also must be removed from play if used as an event, otherwise they stay in play, they can be reshuffled into the deck later. So, events are usually self-explanatory, kinda sorta, but we don't have time to get into that. Operations, that's very important. The player that plays the card and activates units using that value is called in the game, I believe, the offensive player. I never thought of that way. I thought of that as the active player. What do you do when you play a card? That's great. You activate units. You activate a headquarter, and the headquarter in turn can activate units within its command range. The number of units that you can activate is equal to this number here, which is the efficiency rating of the headquarter, plus the operational value of the card. This headquarter activated by this card can activate up to 5 units. And we place it here. I don't know if it makes any sense in terms of gameplay, but just to show you how the game works. So units that are activated move around, do stuff, and the number of hexes that they move, the number of movement points that they receive, is based on the value of the card that was used to activate the headquarter, which in turn activates the units. For example, if I play a 3 card, then I look at this line here, the movement table, cross-reference with the type of unit that I'm moving, and that tells me the number of movement points that the unit receives. Units need to stop along the way, they need to break down long trips into legs of the trip, they need to pretty much hop from airport to make sure that they get wherever they need to go. After movement is completed, you have combat. Hooray, that's what everybody wants to see. You have combat, and after combat is resolved, that's pretty important. After combat is resolved, you will also need to move your naval units back to port and your aircraft unit back to airports. You have a special movement that you can perform after the battle in order to do that, to make sure that your units don't get stranded into the ocean. Now, how do you resolve combat? Unless differently specified by card events, the intelligence situation in which combat starts is a surprise attack. Surprise, surprise, they're attacking us. Boom, that's it, you resolve the attack. There is also another situation in which you may be able to change the value of an attack, to change the value of an attack, to change the intelligence situation of an attack by playing a card, and you can turn that into intercept or into ambush. If you do not have a card such as that one, but you still want to try, then you roll a die and you look at that number. You roll a d10. If you're using this card for its OC, I look at this value, operational value. If I use the card as an event and I still trigger the battle, then I look at that number there. I'm the non-active player rolling to change the intelligence status from surprise to intercept. If I roll equal to or less than the number that I'm using, then I change the status of the intelligence from surprise attack to intercept. And when that happens, that is good, because that means that I can activate one of my headquarters that has a range in which the battle is falling. That has a range, the battle is in the range of the headquarter, then I can use that headquarter to activate units to participate to that battle. And units do not necessarily need to be physically in the battle hex, they can also contribute by range if they are, for example, carriers. So what happens is that you may have a reaction move in which the non-active player is trying to bring as many people as possible to the battle. Those are situations in which the active player takes control of important hexes, such as a resource hex or a city. The non-active player doesn't have any unit. The non-active player may still try to get an intercept situation, may still try to have an emergency situation where units are brought in through a reaction move to defend the important hex. So whether a reaction has been allowed or not, we need to resolve combat. To resolve combat, you look at the attack value of all of the units that you have in the battle. Suppose we have 4 and 16 is 20, 30. Then you need to roll a die on the air and naval combat table. If you have air and naval combat units involved in the battle, then you need to resolve air and naval combat first. You roll a die, you take into account modifiers that may apply to the die roll, and then you will simply modify your attack strength based on the result. Suppose that I had an attack strength of 30, and after I roll the die and modify the result, my final result is 5. Then of those 30 attack points, I can use 15, 1/2. Could have been worse, could have been better. That is the sheer number of damage points that you inflict on the opponent. The opponent does the same, rolls a die, applies modifiers, it modifies the attack value of his units, and that's the damage that you receive. Damage is then applied against the resistance, against the defense of the opponent. Suppose that I'm inflicting 15 points of damage, then I inflict 14 there, flip that unit, and I'm left with a single point. I cannot do anything with it. Suppose that I had a lot of points of damage to assign, I would still have had to reduce all units before I could inflict a second hit on a unit and sink or destroy the unit. Unless I roll the natural 9, in that case I achieved a critical hit. In that case you can assign damage any way you want. That means you assign a critical hit on a single opponent, for example, and you can sink some big guy because you direct all damage or most of the damage against a single target. It may also be that ground units are involved, for example, in case of an amphibious assault. Then, if the attacking units won the battle, that means that they have control of the sky after the initial air and naval combat. That means if they have more points in the situation, then you can have a ground combat. Ground combat happens between ground units, and really, just let's place it here just for exemplification, and it works pretty much in the same way as air and naval. You roll a die to determine how many of your attack points you will be able to use. You look at the modifiers for the ground combat, you look at the ground combat result table, and that tells you how much damage you will be able to inflict. As you can see, ground combat can be super bloody. You can even double, you can get up to doubling the damage that you inflict on the opponent, twice as many points as the ones indicated by the attack points on your unit. When I first looked at the rule book, I saw it's a little over 30 pages of rules. How hard can that be? But there is a conceptual density which is pretty intense. It is thick with rules and sub-rules and specific situations. The general concepts are not very hard. I mean, the turn structure is pretty much what I told you about. Players get cards, they play cards for operations or events, move, attack, and repeat. The complex stuff is in the fact that many of these concepts are not very common in other games, so you sort of like have to learn things from scratch, even if you're an experienced wargamer. And there are a lot of specific rules, specific cases, which have a purpose. They do not come from any form of, say, sadism on the designer's part. He just wanted to be cruel for the sake of it. The complexity of all the rules that I do not have time to cover in my review is related to the geopolitical events which are represented partially on the map and partially outside of the map. That is, the game really has a lot of layers, an economic layer, a layer that describes the war in Europe. There are a lot of cases, a lot of things that you can do, a lot of factors that you kind of have to learn how to handle them. For example, the purpose for the Japanese player is to knock countries out of the war as fast as possible to reduce the commitment of the Allies in the war. To do that, different countries have different rules about the conditions that will force them to surrender. You had to learn those. There are specific rules about the shipping points, how many shipping points you get to move land units on the sea, and the Japanese player may get barges, things that may affect that, the number of cars that you get, how you perform submarine warfare. The ally player can perform bombing over Japan. There's a procedure to resolve that. Lot of procedures to resolve things such as this one, the India status, the China status, the war in Europe and what that entails. It is just all that is around the core of rules that I explained to you, which is particularly tough to learn. There is no other way of putting it. And there are very loud people walking around here. Gee, that's loud. Back to us. Yes, a lot of complexity, but on the plus side, it is a good investment. Actually, I would say it's an excellent investment because the game, not for the faint of the heart, is learnable and playable. It's very good if played solitaire. I played only solitaire. I enjoyed it. I don't mind the fact that you know the hand of cards of the opponent. There are a lot of variations, a lot of situations that may arise, a lot of surprises that may still happen, even if you're playing the game by yourself. In a certain way, then I didn't feel guilty going back to the rulebook every couple of seconds, checking this and checking that. I could take my time learning the game. So yes, a lot of complexity, but then it really gives you a strong sense of the event. It really gives a strong historical feel. When you become familiar with all of the historical situations that may arise and you have to deal with and you have to manipulate, then those start looking like resources instead of impediments, instead of obstacles. Become things that you factor in, things that you can play around, things that you can have fun affecting and influencing. It is a very good game. I do not regret the time that it took me to learn and the headache or two. I did get those, but it was worth it. This is really an excellent game. Not for everybody, definitely for the committed wargamer. It will take some work, but at the end you do have this excellent very nuanced simulation with a million possible things that you can factor in, a huge replay value because of the card engine and precisely because of things that may go differently from game to game. A very good investment from the point of view of money, from the point of view of time and energy. Empire of the Sun, it's a game that I definitely enjoyed. I do not play many strategic games at strategic level. I haven't played many in my life. This is definitely one of the best ones of that type that I ever played.